Welcome back to the YouTube channel Programming Knowledge. In today's Microsoft Excel tutorials video, we would be continuing our discussion and we were previously talking about pivot tables and how can we customize it as per our choice. So we have already taken a look at some of the options, but there are still some options that needs to be covered. And one of the important features of the pivot table is that it shows dynamic data. Now what we had done in our previous video was turned off the field headers. Now once these field headers are turned off, then we do not have any option to apply the filters in our pivot table. And when we do not have any option to apply the filters, then the table data is now set to static and it cannot be changed. So this must contradict the whole feature of pivot table, which is showing the dynamic data, but that is not gonna happen because we are going to use some feature which helps us to apply the filters without showing these field headers. So how can we go about that is we can just first click on the pivot table. Any of the active cell must be inside the pivot table. Then go to this Analyze tab. Here we have in the filter group an option of insert slicer. If you just click on it, then you can see that these are the various options which are actually the columns of our original data source. If you can just see, okay, I am just closing it for a second and I'm just scrolling to my original data source, then click on insert slicer, then you can see all these options are actually the column headings of our original data source. Now, as far as our table is concerned, we had taken item and years. This means if we click on item and years, then these two slicers would be available to us. Now, what is the usage of these slicers? These slicers will actually contain all the data that is present in the table, and using that data, we can filter our pivot table. Since the active cell we had was in this pivot table, whose name is pivot table 2, as you can see in the top left corner. So the slicers that we are going to construct would be associated with this table. Now if we move or perform any changes over these slicers, then the changes would be reflected in this pivot table, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so I'm choosing two slicers, one for item and one for years. Now you can choose any number of slicers, it's totally up to you. Okay, and once you are happy with it, you can click on OK. So you can see that we have these two slicers in front of us. We can just bring them over here. Okay. Now, if we look at years, then we have two options, 2018 and 2019. Okay, but I only want to show the data of the year 2018. If you click on 2018, you can see that only 2018's data is visible to us. But in the items option, I want to show only pens which are sold in the year 2018. So I click on pen, and 2 pens were sold in the year 2018. That's what the data I get. But what if I want to show that how many pens were actually sold in both the years? That is combined in the year 2018 and 2019. Then what do I do? If I simply click on 2019, then you can see that this data has moved to only 2019. That means I need to multi-select the data. Now how can I go with multi-selection? There are two options for that. First is you press a control and just click on this option. If you do that, then both of them are selected. But if you do not want to do that, then how can you go for it? Here in the slicer itself, you can see there is this option which allows you to multi-select the data. Once you activate it, now you can simply click on the data and it would enable multi-select. Similarly, if you do not want only the pens to be visible, I also want pen set and pencil to be visible. So just go to this slicer, enable multi-select for it, and you can turn the data for pen set and pencil to be visible to the viewer. Now, if you want all data to be visible, then how can you go for it? You can go to this clear filter option in the slicer, and once you do that, you can see that all the data is now visible that was originally present in the pivot table. So that is the usage of the slicers. And why are slicers so important? Whenever you are going out for presentations, then it is advised to use a slicer instead of the field headers in pivot table, because slicers allow you to customize or filter the data in a more visible form and in a very easy format. Okay, so now once you have got the slicers, you also may want to customize its view. So how can you do that? It's pretty simple. Once you are in your slicer, there is this options tab. Using this options tab, you can customize everything about your slicer that you want. Okay, so I have selected my slicer, which has the information about the items. Okay, that is why it has got this item in front of it. But what do I do if I want to change it to something else, say count of items, because actually the count of items is visible in my pivot table. So I can go to this slicer group. There is this item. Instead of item, I can just type count of items. So I am typing count of items, and once I press enter, you can see that count of items is what its new name is. Similarly, you can go to the slicer settings as well. From here also you can just customize it to anything that you want. There is this display header. If there is a check on it, then you can customize it to anything you want, but there is no check, then you cannot show the header. I just uncheck it and click on OK. Then you can see that yes, there is no header, so there is a disadvantages. Now you cannot multi-select, you cannot clear the filters. That is why I go to the slicer headings and make sure that the display header option is checked. Similarly, there is some sorting and filtering options for the slicer as well. Now what are these options? By default, the data is sorted in the ascending order, but what if you want to sort it in the descending order? You can go for it as well. Here it is sorted in descending order. You can click on OK. So now it is sorted in the descending order. Similarly, you can go to slicer settings and you can just check on this item that hide items with no data. If there are some items which have no data, you can hide them as well. Once you click on OK, then nothing is hidden, because of course there is no items which had no data. So here we have some items like this which are disabled. Actually they have no data. So if we go to the slicer settings and we check this option and click on OK, so these two items are actually hidden because they had no data. Okay, now similarly you can go to slicer settings and you can just turn it on. So if you want to visually indicate those items with no data and show the items deleted from the data source, these are these various options through which you can customize your slicer. Like if there is no item present and you want to show it, do you want to visually indicate it to the user? Yes or no? Similarly, if you do not want to indicate it, then also you can go for it. Okay, so that is about appearance of the slicer, how you can customize it. Now what if you want to show that this slicer is connected to which table? And there is an interesting fact that one slicer could be connected to many of the pivot tables as well. So if you want to show that this particular slicer, how many connections it has, so how can you do that is you can go to this report connections and you can see that there is this name of the pivot table 2, which is actually this table, and in which sheet this table is present, sheet 1. So this is one connection that this slicer has. You can check it with the slicer name as well. Years, this means this is the active slicer. So this is the information about this slicer, and you can click on OK. So with this you can also know that how many connections a slicer has. So let us understand that how can we just associate one slicer with many tables, with many pivot tables. So but before that, let us first understand that how can we customize our slicer. So as you can see, by default we have got this blue view of the slicer, but what if we want to change it? You can just go to the slicer styles option and you can change it to anything that you want. Okay, I'm going with this green color. Similarly for this slicer also you can just go with this green color, and this option is now changed. So using this, there are these various styles option which you can apply on your slicer. You can change it to customize its style to anything that you want. Similarly, there is this arranging option. If you can see that this count of items is actually behind years. If you want to bring it forward, you can bring it forward as well, like this. If you want to send it back, you can send it to the backwards as well. So apart from this, you can also align it to these various options which are actually disabled right now. The reason being cause we do not have any criteria for aligning them. Okay, now if you want to change the size of the slicer, simply you can drag it and change it like this. Now you can also customize the slicer and check that or you can connect with one slicer with more than one pivot table. That is what is going to be our topic for the next video. So this is all for today's video. Thanks for watching.